Sometimes the smallest decision costs the most money and changes the most lives. The security alarm echoed through the luxury boutique, just as Claire Bennett felt every pair of eyes turn toward her. She froze beside the display near the entrance, her heartbeat louder than the alarm itself, her worn canvas tote hanging loosely from one shoulder. Outside, downtown Chicago moved like any other weekday morning, taxis honking, people rushing toward office towers, unaware that inside the polished marble showroom, a young woman was watching her life unravel in slow motion. "Ma'am, we're going to need you to stay right here," a store manager said, forcing a polite smile that never reached his eyes. Claire swallowed hard. "I didn't take anything." Her voice came out softer than she intended. The manager folded his arms. "Then you won't mind waiting until security reviews everything." Around her, whispers floated through the room. Some customers glanced at her faded sneakers. Others noticed the frayed sleeve of her coat or the inexpensive backpack she carried everywhere because it doubled as her work bag. Nobody said she looked guilty. Nobody had to. Claire looked toward the glass doors, wondering if she should simply leave, but two security guards were already standing nearby, not threatening, simply making it painfully clear that walking away was no longer an option. Her phone buzzed inside her pocket. The screen briefly lit up with a notification from her landlord. Rent overdue. Final notice. She couldn't even bring herself to read the rest. Not today. She closed her eyes for 1 second. She had worked the breakfast shift at a neighborhood diner before sunrise. In less than an hour, she was supposed to start another shift across town. Missing either job meant losing money she couldn't afford to lose. "Please," she whispered. "I really have to go." "It won't take long," the manager replied. At that exact moment, a convoy of black SUVs rolled to a stop outside the boutique. One after another, sharply dressed executives stepped onto the sidewalk, checking expensive watches while speaking urgently into wireless headsets. In the center of them walked Nathan Brooks, founder of Brooks Capital, dressed in a navy suit that looked perfectly ordinary until someone recognized the man wearing it. His assistant hurried beside him holding a tablet. "Sir, the board is already waiting. If we leave now, we'll still make the $1 billion acquisition meeting." Nathan never answered. His attention had shifted through the boutique window. He noticed the frightened young woman standing alone while everyone else kept their distance. He noticed the embarrassment on her face, the exhaustion in her eyes, and the way she kept clutching the strap of her worn bag as though it were the only thing still grounding her. "Sir," his assistant repeated. Nathan didn't move. Instead, he opened the boutique door and walked inside. Conversations immediately stopped. The manager recognized him instantly. "Mr. Brooks, we weren't expecting." Nathan calmly raised one hand before looking directly at Claire. "May I ask what happened?" Before anyone could answer, the manager explained that an expensive bracelet had disappeared moments before the alarm sounded, and Claire happened to be standing closest to the display. Nathan glanced toward the security cameras mounted across the ceiling. "Have you reviewed the footage?" "Not yet," the manager admitted. Nathan checked the time, then slipped his phone back into his pocket. Somewhere across the city, dozens of investors were waiting for him to approve the largest deal of the year. None of that seemed to matter anymore. "Then let's watch it first," he said quietly. No one should carry someone else's suspicion when the truth is only a few minutes away. The security footage lasted less than 3 minutes, but for Claire Bennett, it felt longer than the hardest year of her life. Every screen inside the manager's office showed the same angle from different cameras. Customers wandered between polished glass displays while employees greeted them with rehearsed smiles. Then the missing bracelet came into view. A woman wearing an expensive cream-colored coat examined it briefly before placing it on a nearby counter while answering a phone call. Seconds later, another employee unknowingly picked up a velvet display cloth, wrapping the bracelet inside before carrying everything toward the stockroom. The manager stared in disbelief. One of the security guards immediately hurried away, returning less than a minute later with the bracelet safely tucked inside the folded cloth. Silence settled over the room. Nobody looked at Claire anymore. Instead, every eye shifted toward the floor. The manager cleared his throat, suddenly unable to meet her gaze. "Miss Bennett, I owe you an apology. We made the wrong assumption." Claire forced a small smile even though her hands were still trembling. "It is all right," she answered quietly, although it was not all right at all. Embarrassment did not disappear just because someone said they were sorry. Nathan watched her carefully. She never demanded compensation. She never raised her voice. She simply picked up her worn backpack and thanked the security guard who had opened the door for her, as though she were the one apologizing for causing inconvenience. As she stepped onto the sidewalk, the cold Chicago wind brushed against her face. She inhaled slowly, trying to steady herself before walking toward the nearest bus stop. Behind her, Nathan's assistant spoke with growing urgency. "Sir, the board has already delayed the meeting twice. Every investor is waiting." Nathan looked through the glass at Claire's shrinking figure. "Reschedule it." His assistant blinked. "Reschedule the acquisition? Tomorrow morning." "Sir, that could cost millions." Nathan gave a calm smile. "Then it costs millions." Without another word, he walked back toward his waiting car, but Claire remained in his thoughts long after the city skyline disappeared behind tinted windows. Meanwhile, Claire checked the time and realized she had already missed the beginning of her afternoon shift. She hurried 3 blocks before finally reaching the neighborhood cafe where she worked every weekday. The owner looked up from the register with concern instead of anger. "Long day?" he asked gently. Claire nodded. "Longer than I expected." She tied on her apron and spent the next 6 hours serving coffee, clearing tables, and smiling at strangers, even though her mind never stopped replaying what had happened inside the boutique. Every time the entrance bell chimed, she instinctively glanced toward the door, almost expecting the sharply dressed businessman to appear again. He never did. That evening, she climbed the narrow stairs to the 3rd floor of her aging apartment building. Paint peeled from the hallway walls. One light bulb flickered above the mailboxes. Waiting on her apartment door was another bright orange notice from the landlord reminding her that rent remained unpaid and that formal action would begin within 48 hours. Claire slowly removed the paper and folded it into her bag without opening it again. Inside her apartment, the refrigerator contained little more than a carton of milk, half a loaf of bread, and a jar of peanut butter. She sat quietly beside the window, watching lights appear across neighboring buildings while calculating numbers that refused to work. Even after both jobs, there simply was not enough. Somewhere across the city, Nathan Brooks finished a late evening conference call from his office overlooking the Chicago River. The presentation on his screen described billion-dollar investments and international expansion, but his attention drifted toward a single name he had quietly asked his assistant to find before leaving the boutique that afternoon: Claire Bennett. The next morning arrived wrapped in gray clouds and a steady drizzle that painted the streets of Chicago in muted reflections. Claire Bennett woke before sunrise, not because she had slept well, but because anxiety had become a more reliable alarm clock than any phone. She quietly folded the blanket she had fallen asleep under, slipped into her diner uniform, and paused beside the orange notice still resting on her small kitchen table. 48 hours. The numbers echoed inside her mind with every breath. She picked up the paper, folded it neatly, and placed it inside a drawer as though hiding it could somehow postpone reality. Outside, the city was already awake. She poured coffee for commuters, smiled at customers who barely noticed her name tag, and accepted generous thank yous that never became generous tips. By late afternoon, exhaustion settled into her shoulders, but she still forced herself toward her second job at the neighborhood cafe. Every dollar mattered now. Across town, Nathan Brooks stood inside his office overlooking the Chicago River as sunlight briefly broke through the clouds. His assistant placed a slim folder on the conference table. "Everything you requested, sir." Nathan opened it without speaking. Claire Bennett, 27 years old. 2 jobs. No criminal record. Excellent references. Late rent payments over the past 3 months. No family listed as an emergency contact. He closed the folder slowly. None of the information surprised him. Somehow, he had already seen it in her eyes the moment she quietly accepted an apology that could never erase humiliation. "Who owns her building?" Nathan asked. His assistant answered almost immediately. "A small property management company on the north side." Nathan nodded once. "Call them." Less than an hour later, a confidential wire transfer quietly cleared every overdue balance on Claire's apartment. 2 additional months of rent were paid in advance. Nathan gave only one instruction: the payment stays anonymous. No letters from me. No signatures. No publicity. His assistant hesitated. If she asks who helped her? Nathan looked out the window again. She will not receive my name. That evening, Claire climbed the familiar staircase, expecting another warning taped to her apartment door. Instead, she found nothing. Confused, she unlocked the mailbox downstairs. Inside rested a plain white envelope with no return address. Her heartbeat quickened. She slowly unfolded the single sheet of paper inside. Rent balance, paid in full. Credit applied for the next 2 months. At the bottom, one handwritten sentence appeared in careful blue ink. Someone believes in you. Claire stared at the words until they blurred. She checked the envelope again. No company logo. No signature. Nothing that explained the impossible gift. She hurried upstairs and knocked on her landlord's office door. The elderly manager smiled warmly when he opened it. "Miss Bennett, I was just about to call you." Claire held up the receipt with shaking hands. "There has to be some mistake." He adjusted his glasses before reading the document. "No mistake. Everything has been paid. Whoever sent it specifically requested complete privacy." Claire frowned. "Did you meet them?" He slowly shook his head. "The payment came electronically. Even I do not know who it was." She thanked him and walked back to her apartment in stunned silence. The tiny space looked exactly the same as it had that morning, yet somehow everything felt different. She placed the handwritten note on the refrigerator with a small magnet shaped like a sunflower, reading the sentence again before whispering softly into the quiet room. "Whoever you are, thank you." Miles away, Nathan finished another board meeting without mentioning the transfer to anyone. While executives celebrated successful investments worth hundreds of millions of dollars, his thoughts drifted not toward stock prices or quarterly reports, but toward a modest apartment where he hoped one frightened young woman might finally sleep through the night without wondering whether she would still have a place to call home the next morning. 3 days passed, yet Claire Bennett still caught herself glancing at strangers whenever she walked through the city, wondering if one of them had quietly changed her life. The handwritten note remained attached to her refrigerator, its simple message becoming the first thing she saw every morning before leaving for work. "Someone believes in you." Those 4 words carried more warmth than the expensive apartment she could never have afforded on her own. They reminded her that somewhere in a city of nearly 3 million people, kindness still existed. Saturday brought rare sunshine after nearly a week of rain. Claire finished her breakfast shift early and decided to spend her only free hour in a small public library a few blocks from the Chicago River. She often visited not because she had time to read, but because the quiet helped settle her thoughts. She borrowed books about business, customer service, and marketing, hoping that one day she might earn a better position instead of juggling 2 hourly jobs forever. As she stepped outside carrying 2 borrowed books, one slipped from the stack and landed on the sidewalk. Before she could bend down, another hand reached it first. "I think this belongs to you," a familiar voice said. Claire looked up and immediately recognized the man from the boutique. He was dressed differently this time. No tailored suit, no waiting executives, just dark jeans, a simple charcoal sweater, and a light jacket that made him look like any ordinary professional enjoying a weekend in the city. "You are the man who helped me," she said with genuine surprise. Nathan smiled politely as he handed her the book. "I am glad you remember me." Claire laughed softly. "I do not think I could forget." For a brief moment, neither of them spoke. The afternoon breeze carried the scent of roasted coffee from a nearby cafe while cyclists passed along the river walk. Everything felt unexpectedly normal. "May I buy you a cup of coffee?" Nathan asked. Claire hesitated before smiling. "Only if I can buy the next one." Nathan nodded as though it were the most reasonable agreement in the world. They found a quiet corner inside a neighborhood cafe overlooking the water. Unlike the elegant restaurants Nathan usually visited for business meetings, this place served coffee in oversized ceramic mugs and displayed local artwork on brick walls. Claire immediately seemed more comfortable there. Conversation came easier than either of them expected. She spoke about long work days, favorite books, and how libraries had become her escape whenever life felt overwhelming. Nathan listened far more than he spoke. When she finally asked what he did for a living, he answered with careful simplicity, "I work in finance." Claire tilted her head. "That sounds important." Nathan shrugged with a small smile. "Mostly it means too many meetings." She laughed. "Then you probably deserve today off." Nathan almost admitted that he had canceled more meetings than anyone in his company would ever understand. But instead, he simply smiled into his coffee. Claire looked out the cafe window for a moment before speaking again. Something impossible happened this week. Nathan remained silent, waiting. Someone paid my rent. They never left a name. Just one sentence. She lowered her eyes, almost embarrassed by how much it still affected her. I wish I knew who they were so I could thank them. Nathan felt the weight of those words settle quietly between them, but his expression never changed. Maybe, he said gently, some people do not help because they want to be thanked. Maybe they just hope someone gets another chance. Claire smiled thoughtfully. If that is true, then I hope they know they gave one. Nathan looked toward the river, hiding the quiet emotion that crossed his face, realizing that for the first time in years, one honest conversation meant more to him than every successful deal waiting back at his office. Over the next several weeks, their chance meeting at the cafe quietly turned into a familiar routine neither of them had planned. Sometimes they met on Saturday mornings before Claire's afternoon shift. Other times they crossed paths near the library or along the river walk, where autumn slowly painted the trees in shades of gold and crimson. Nathan never suggested expensive restaurants or exclusive clubs. Instead, he chose ordinary places where conversations mattered more than appearances. Claire appreciated that without realizing how unusual it was for someone with his resources to avoid luxury so naturally. The more time they spent together, the more Nathan admired the quiet strength she carried every day. She never complained about working double shifts. She spoke kindly about difficult customers. She celebrated small victories that most people would never notice, like receiving a handwritten thank you from an elderly regular at the cafe, or finally saving enough money to replace her worn winter boots before the first snowfall. Nathan found himself looking forward to those stories more than quarterly earnings reports or investment briefings. One afternoon, while walking past a neighborhood community center, Claire stopped to watch volunteers organizing donated books for local families. Without hesitation, she walked inside and offered to help even though she only had 40 minutes before work. Nathan followed quietly. Together they spent nearly an hour carrying boxes, arranging shelves, and greeting grateful parents. Nobody recognized Nathan Brooks. To everyone there, he was simply another volunteer named Nathan. As they stacked the final box, an elderly volunteer smiled warmly at them. "You two make a wonderful team." Claire laughed, her cheeks turning slightly pink. "We are just friends." Nathan smiled, but said nothing. Somehow, the words felt both true and incomplete. Later that evening, they shared sandwiches on a bench overlooking the river as the city lights slowly reflected across the water. Claire glanced at him curiously. "Can I ask you something?" Nathan nodded. "Of course. You always seem available. Most people in finance work impossible hours. How do you keep finding time?" Nathan looked toward the skyline before answering carefully. "I spent years believing work was the most important thing in my life. Recently, I have started wondering if I was measuring success the wrong way." Claire considered his answer for a moment before smiling gently. "Then whoever made you rethink things did you a favor." Nathan quietly looked at her. "I think you might be right." His phone vibrated inside his jacket. The screen filled with messages from his executive team reminding him about an international investor conference beginning in less than 20 minutes. Without reading them, he pressed the side button and slipped the phone back into his pocket. Claire noticed the movement. "You do not have to ignore work because of me." Nathan smiled softly. "Trust me, this conversation is more important." She laughed, believing he was joking. He was not. For the first time in many years, Nathan realized he no longer measured his days by contracts signed or companies acquired. Instead, he remembered simple moments like hearing Claire laugh at an old joke, watching her help strangers without expecting anything in return, or listening to her speak about dreams she had nearly convinced herself to abandon. Claire, meanwhile, had begun to feel something she had not experienced in a long time. Safety. Nathan never made her feel judged for having little. He never offered money, never tried to solve her problems, and never treated her like someone who needed rescuing. He simply listened. Unknown to her, that restraint required more discipline than closing any billion-dollar deal. Nathan could have transformed her life with a single phone call. Instead, he chose something far more difficult. He chose to let her discover who he was before she ever discovered what he owned, believing that if their connection survived without wealth standing between them, it might become the most valuable thing either of them had ever found. Nearly a month passed before everything changed. It happened on a crisp Thursday afternoon when Claire Bennett was wiping down tables near the front window of the cafe. The lunch crowd had finally slowed, and she was looking forward to a quiet hour before the evening rush began. The owner walked over holding a cream-colored envelope with her name written neatly across the front. "This was dropped off for you about an hour ago," he said. The messenger said it was important. Claire thanked him and carefully opened the envelope. Inside was an elegant invitation embossed with silver lettering. "Brooks Community Foundation cordially invites you to our annual Partners Gala in recognition of your volunteer service at the Riverside Community Center. Formal attire requested." Claire read the invitation twice. She had only volunteered there a handful of times with Nathan. Surely there had been some mistake. That evening she called the community center, but the director warmly confirmed that her name had indeed been submitted by one of the senior volunteers who admired her dedication. Claire smiled, touched by the unexpected gesture. She called Nathan immediately. "I received the strangest invitation today," she said, laughing softly. "A charity gala. I have absolutely nothing to wear." Nathan's heart skipped for a moment, although his voice remained calm. "You should go." "Easy for you to say," Claire replied. "People at those events probably own dresses that cost more than my apartment." Nathan smiled to himself. "Then wear the dress that makes you feel like yourself." 2 evenings later, Claire stood outside the grand ballroom of the Lakeshore Grand Hotel, wearing a simple navy blue dress she had borrowed from a coworker. She almost turned around twice before walking inside. Crystal chandeliers reflected warm light across polished marble floors, while a string quartet played quietly in the background. Guests greeted one another with effortless confidence, speaking about investments, foundations, and international projects that sounded impossibly distant from her everyday life. Claire searched the room for Nathan, but could not find him anywhere. She assumed he had simply been busy with work. A server offered her a glass of sparkling water, and she accepted it gratefully before slipping toward the back of the ballroom, hoping to remain unnoticed. Suddenly the lights dimmed slightly as the master of ceremonies stepped onto the stage. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, "thank you for joining us in celebrating another year of service and community impact. None of tonight would be possible without the vision and generosity of one extraordinary leader." Applause filled the room. Claire smiled politely, expecting another unfamiliar name. Then she heard it. "Please welcome the founder and chairman of Brooks Capital and Brooks Community Foundation, Mr. Nathan Brooks." Time seemed to stop. Claire slowly turned toward the stage, just as Nathan walked into the spotlight, wearing a perfectly tailored black tuxedo. The audience rose to its feet in a standing ovation. Cameras flashed from every direction. Board members, city officials, and business leaders stepped forward to shake his hand. Behind him, enormous screens displayed photographs of charitable projects alongside the words Founder and Chief Executive Officer. Claire felt the room spin gently around her. Finance. Too many meetings. The canceled phone calls. The quiet confidence. Every conversation suddenly carried a different meaning. Her eyes widened as another image appeared on the screen, showing Nathan signing one of the largest investment agreements in the country only weeks earlier. The man who had shared sandwiches with her on a park bench was not an ordinary professional. He was one of the most influential businessmen in America. Nathan looked across the crowded ballroom while accepting the applause, and in that very moment his eyes found Claire standing silently near the back of the room. Neither of them smiled. Neither of them moved. Across the distance separating them, one truth became impossible to hide any longer. Claire Bennett could barely hear the applause anymore. The elegant ballroom, the music, the conversations, even the sparkling chandeliers above her seemed to fade into a distant blur. All she could see was Nathan Brooks standing beneath the bright lights as reporters gathered around him and executives waited to congratulate him. The man who had shared coffee with her, carried boxes beside her at the community center, and listened patiently as she spoke about overdue rent and impossible dreams, was not simply someone who worked in finance. He was the man whose name appeared in business magazines, whose companies employed thousands of people, and whose decisions shaped entire industries. Without realizing it, Claire slowly stepped backward until she reached the hallway outside the ballroom. She needed air. She needed silence. Most of all, she needed to understand why he had never told her the truth. A few moments later, the ballroom doors opened behind her. Nathan had quietly excused himself from the reception despite dozens of guests trying to stop him. He found Claire standing beside a tall window overlooking the Chicago skyline. Neither of them spoke immediately. Finally, Claire broke the silence. "How long?" she asked softly. Nathan already knew what she meant. "From the beginning," he answered honestly. She nodded once, staring out at the city lights below. "Every time I asked what you did, every time I joked about your meetings, you already knew." "Yes. And you let me believe you were just ordinary." Nathan took a slow breath. "I let you believe I was simply Nathan." She turned toward him, disappointment replacing the shock that had filled her eyes only minutes earlier. "You watched me worry about paying rent." Nathan remained silent. "You listened while I talked about someone secretly helping me." Her voice became quieter, almost trembling with emotion rather than anger. "Did you already know who paid it?" Nathan looked directly into her eyes. "Yes." Claire closed her eyes for one painful second. Every memory suddenly rearranged itself. The mysterious payment, the handwritten note, his calm answer inside the cafe, his strange confidence whenever she wondered about the anonymous stranger. "It was you," she whispered. Nathan did not deny it. "Why?" Claire asked. "Why would you hide something like that?" Nathan answered with complete honesty. "Because the moment you knew who I was afraid everything between us would change." Claire looked at him for a long moment before quietly shaking her head. "Nathan, you made that decision for both of us." Those words struck harder than any public criticism he had ever received. She continued, her voice steady despite the emotion she was trying so hard to control. "You gave me kindness, and I will always be grateful for that. But friendship cannot grow without trust. You never gave me the chance to decide whether your money mattered to me because you kept the truth locked away." Nathan searched for the right words, but none of them seemed worthy enough. Billion-dollar negotiations had never left him speechless before, yet standing in front of Claire felt infinitely more difficult. "I never wanted you to feel like a charity project," he finally said. Claire lowered her eyes. "That is exactly how I feel now." The hallway became painfully quiet. Guests continued laughing inside the ballroom, completely unaware that two lives were quietly drifting apart only a few feet away. Claire offered him a small, grateful smile filled with sadness rather than bitterness. "Thank you for believing in me before I believed in myself," she said gently. "But right now, I need to find out whether I can believe in you again." Without another word, she turned and walked toward the hotel entrance, leaving Nathan standing alone beneath the soft golden lights, realizing that losing her trust hurt far more than losing any fortune ever could. The days that followed felt strangely empty for both of them, although neither admitted it aloud. Claire Bennett buried herself in work, accepting extra shifts at the diner and the cafe whenever they became available. She convinced herself that staying busy was easier than replaying every conversation she had shared with Nathan Brooks. Yet no matter how exhausted she became, she still caught herself looking toward the door whenever someone walked into the cafe, wondering if he might appear with that familiar quiet smile. He never did. Nathan respected the distance she had asked for. He did not call. He did not send flowers. He did not ask mutual acquaintances to speak on his behalf. Instead, he focused on something Claire herself had once inspired. During one of their afternoons volunteering together, she had quietly mentioned how many hardworking adults wanted to improve their lives but could never afford professional training. She had spoken passionately about giving people opportunity instead of sympathy. Nathan had never forgotten those words. 3 weeks later, Brooks Community Foundation announced a new nationwide initiative called Second Step. The program offered free career training, interview coaching, financial education, and emergency housing assistance for working adults facing temporary hardship. Thousands applied within days. The press praised the foundation's vision, but Nathan declined every interview. He refused to stand in front of cameras or attach his personal story to the project. The work mattered more than the recognition. Claire learned about the initiative by accident while serving coffee to 2 teachers discussing local news. Curious, she searched online after her shift ended. The program description sounded strangely familiar, almost as though someone had taken pieces of conversations she remembered having beside the Chicago River and quietly turned them into reality. At the bottom of the article appeared a link inviting volunteers to tour the foundation's new training center before its public opening. Unsure why, Claire registered. 2 days later, she walked into the renovated building with dozens of other volunteers. Bright classrooms replaced empty warehouse space. Computer labs stood beside interview rooms. A resource library filled one entire wall. Everything had been designed to restore confidence instead of simply offering temporary relief. While the tour guide explained the program's mission, Claire wandered into a smaller room displaying framed letters from people whose lives had already begun to change through early pilot projects. As she slowly read them, one familiar sentence caught her attention. "Someone believes in you." Her heart skipped. The exact same handwriting appeared beneath the words she had kept on her refrigerator for weeks. Claire stared at the framed note in complete silence. A volunteer coordinator noticed her expression and walked over with a warm smile. "Beautiful message, isn't it?" Claire nodded slowly. "Who wrote it?" The coordinator smiled. "Mr. Brooks insisted that every welcome packet include those words. Apparently, he said encouragement should arrive before opportunity." Claire swallowed hard. "Does everyone know he came up with it?" The coordinator laughed softly. "Actually, no. He wanted the message to stay anonymous. We only found out because the printing company accidentally sent us the original draft with his handwritten notes. He almost threw it away after asking us to remove his name." Claire felt her chest tighten. He wanted people to think the encouragement came from anyone. "Exactly," the coordinator replied. "He always says that kindness is strongest when it asks for nothing in return." Claire lowered her eyes toward the framed sentence once more. For the first time since leaving the gala, another possibility quietly entered her heart. Perhaps Nathan had never hidden behind his wealth. Perhaps he had been trying, imperfectly but sincerely, to step out from in front of it. Claire Bennett left the foundation that afternoon carrying nothing in her hands, yet somehow feeling as though a weight she had carried for years had finally become lighter. Instead of taking the bus home, she walked along the Chicago River where so many of her conversations with Nathan Brooks had quietly unfolded. Every bench, every bridge, every familiar stretch of water reminded her that the man she had fallen for had never tried to impress her with luxury. He had listened when no one else had. He had believed in her before she believed in herself. His mistake had not been helping her. His mistake had been believing that the truth would make her walk away. As the sun began to set behind the skyline, Claire found herself standing outside Brooks Community Foundation headquarters. She hesitated only a moment before walking inside. The receptionist smiled warmly. "May I help you?" Claire nodded. "I am here to see Nathan Brooks, if he has a few minutes." Upstairs, Nathan was finishing a meeting when his assistant quietly entered the room. "Sir," she said with a gentle smile, "there is someone asking for you." Nathan looked toward the hallway and immediately saw Claire waiting near the windows overlooking the city. He thanked everyone in the room before walking out alone. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Claire reached into her purse and carefully unfolded the small handwritten note she had kept since the day her rent had mysteriously been paid. The paper had softened around the edges from being opened so many times. She held it between them and smiled. "I think this belongs to both of us now." Nathan looked at the familiar words and quietly exhaled. "I never wanted gratitude," he admitted. "I only wanted you to have one less reason to give up." Claire stepped a little closer. "I know that now." She looked into his eyes with calm honesty. "I was never hurt because you were wealthy. I was hurt because I thought you trusted your fears more than you trusted me." Nathan nodded slowly. "You were right. I spent so many years wondering whether people saw me or my money that I forgot honesty has to come before trust." Claire smiled gently. "Then maybe we both learned something." They walked outside together as evening lights reflected across the river. Neither rushed to fill the silence because it finally felt comfortable again. When they reached the small bench where they had once shared sandwiches after volunteering, Nathan stopped. "There is something I should have done the first day we met," he said quietly. "I should have introduced myself honestly." Claire laughed softly. "You are a little late." "I know." He reached into his coat pocket, not with a grand display or an audience waiting nearby, but with a small velvet box that seemed almost ordinary against the backdrop of the glowing city. "Claire Bennett, I cannot promise that life will always be simple. My world is still complicated, but I promise there will never again be secrets standing between us. Will you build that future with me?" Tears filled Claire's eyes as she looked from the ring to the man who had first earned her heart long before she knew the size of his fortune. "Yes," she whispered. "Not because you are Nathan Brooks, the businessman. Because you are Nathan, The man who believed in me when I had forgotten how. Months later, friends, co-workers, volunteers, and neighbors gathered for a modest outdoor wedding beside the same river where their story had quietly grown. There were no extravagant displays, only laughter, simple flowers, and people whose lives had been changed by kindness. Inside their first home together, the handwritten note was framed near the front door. Every morning before leaving, they passed the words that had begun everything. Someone believes in you. Years later, they would smile whenever visitors asked about the small frame, because the greatest treasure in their home had never been measured in dollars. It had always been measured in trust, second chances, and the quiet courage to believe in another person before they could believe in themselves.